What does it take to get good at confronting underperforming team members if you're a business owner? That's exactly what I explore in this Coaching Corner breakdown. What you're about to see is a clip from one of my podcast episodes on the Joyous Profits podcast. If you don't know, this is where I take business owners, I coach them live on air on what identity and leadership upgrades they need to make in order to get more peaceful, joyous profits, and do that by eliminating the profit and time leaks that comes from things like avoiding confrontation. So in this clip, you're going to see Hutton Henry, who is a brilliant business owner in his own. He does mergers and acquisitions, consulting in terms of due diligence for tech companies. And one of the things he's always struggled with was people pleasing and the management aspect of his business. In this particular clip, he talks about his fear and hesitation around confrontation, specifically around underperforming team members, which is just contextually not in this clip, but that is what the podcast was about. And what you're going to see is my commentary after he shares one particular thing. And in that commentary, I'm going to break down a few things. So number one is why communication and boundary setting, so the normal things you tend to learn when you're looking to be able to confront and keep team members accountable. So why communication and boundary settings are very much incomplete if you want to master confrontation. Number two, what is the most overlooked thing by business owners that struggle with confrontation and people pleasing in general? Okay, so I break that down in the commentary. And then number three is basically like, how do you establish that bedrock of confidence so that confrontation and the mastery of confrontation is just a natural extension of who you are. Okay. So those are the three main things you're going to see in my commentary. And right now I'm going to transition it to Hutton from his Joyous podcast appearance. And then you'll see my commentary right afterwards.
The main thing is, if it's in your head that you can't confront and you can't set good boundaries and that type of thing, then really the team doesn't know where it's going. And so I've learned that it's okay to do it, but it doesn't mean it's a natural skill.
All right. So one of the first things I want to emphasize here is that he is accurate. That the confrontation is not a natural skill. It doesn't come built in and inherent, especially if you're going to be a business owner, managing people, doing all of the things. I'm looking down at my notes. I'm going to be looking back up and forth just because I want to make sure to cover all of the nuances of just that one small thought that Hutton's sharing on the podcast. So there is a skill aspect to the confrontation, and there's also an emotional aspect that I think is more pertinent and relevant to actually eliminating this problem. So let's break that down. So first things first, there is the skill aspect, and that is like the what do I say? How do I set boundaries? When do I do it? What's the best approach to minimize defensiveness? Like all of those aspects of the actual communication, which is where most business owners spend a lot of time learning and reading and stuff you'll find online, is generally related to, have you ever heard like the sandwich method? You say something good, then you deliver the bad news and you deliver it, some other good news afterwards. Like all of that has its time and place and it's good. But the more important question of it is, there's a plethora of these types of communication hacks and what do I say to navigate this kind of confrontation or accountability or whatever, then why does it not work? It's kind of like all fitness advice really comes down to move more and eat less. But then why doesn't that work? Because it's avoids certain core issues and avoids the foundation that this type of advice is predicated on. So when we look at the confrontation piece, okay, that's not a skill. So what are the skills? And he actually mentions, and I did this in a previous video, of like he's aware, but he's not embodying the things that he's aware of in terms of being able to solve this problem. If you look at this particular thing, okay, he knows that there's like a boundaries aspect to this. He knows that there's a skill aspect to it. I've been working on allowing myself to just admit like it's okay to say what it is that I want. So those are the skill aspects, but then what are the emotional and psychological things that those things are predicated on? And the reality is, even if you just look at that sentence, and I'm looking at the sentence now because I'm looking at the transcript of the actual podcast. So saying, okay, so the main thing is if it's in your head that you can't confront you're not ever going to be able to set good boundaries. Okay, so there's two very key things there. One is the actual belief. What is my association to confrontation? How is my identity rooted in confrontation? In the previous breakdown of this episode, I went into, if I have this association that I am nice, confrontation can go against somebody thinking that I am nice. So if part of my identity is actually rooted in something that's conflicting with what the situation calls for, I'm not going to be able to execute on those communication aspects of actually resolving this thing. So there's a belief aspect. Then there is a boundaries aspect. Okay, so what are boundaries actually predicated on? They're actually predicated on self-esteem and mostly self-assuredness. Like this idea that I am worthy enough to exist and take up space. And I believe that I'm allowed to take up space. Okay, this is one of the pillars of self-esteem. And in that, it basically means, okay, I have needs, I have wants. And if I'm clear on those, and there's not a part of me that resists those, then I can actually work to set boundaries around that. So you can see how it's very misguided to go into how do I communicate to set boundaries, when the reality is, if you actually don't know that you are allowed to set boundaries, and it's subconsciously, not consciously. But if a part of you is like, no, I am not allowed to take up space, I'm not allowed to say what I want, I'm not allowed to voice my needs, right? Whatever your history led to that, you're basically not able to set, like you don't have the raw materials, you don't have the actual footing on which to create and set boundaries, right? And then the last part of what he says in that clip is, I've learned that it's okay to actually confront. So now we're getting into a sub-belief here, which is it's not just okay to have a sense of self that I can create boundaries around. It's not just okay for me to know what it is that I want and actually voice it. But then there's another supporting belief around that. That's, it's actually okay to call it out and confront when somebody steps over that particular boundary. Okay, so you see how now that's just layers of beliefs, and all those layers of beliefs are then predicated on an internal sense of emotion around that. Meaning, you're never going to be able to do this effectively if you don't actually feel confident in it. How do you feel confident in it? Well, it's actually about getting into your own power. Because if I can get into my own power, then that pillar of self-esteem where I can be self-assured, okay, that actually sets. It's what holds it in place. And that doesn't mean being overbearing or overpowering, because that's a different insecurity response. It's a basically hijacking the fight or flight, in this instance, the fight, to overcome so I can control. And that's just it's just a different side of the same type of coin. But anyway, getting back to the thing, it's like, now I can take ownership of the space that I inhabit, and it's okay to say something when somebody crosses that boundaries. And now if you extrapolate that further to the fact this is a business owner, okay, so he signs the checks of the people that are crossing his boundaries, and he has trouble telling them no or confronting them, keeping them accountable. Like, logically, this stuff sounds insane. What the hell are you doing? But internally, and in terms of how that manifests in the business, it literally happens all of the time. And this is why I always say profit and time leaks are the first and primary thing you should be looking for in terms of optimizing your business before anything else. And profit and time leaks, if you are the owner and not the team member, start from you looking at your identity. Right? We talked a lot about different things in here with regards to identity. The leadership, which is essentially how you're going to apply whatever your identity is to the business systems, to the people. And the merging of those two together means the input into the business, and you are the core primary input into the business. If that is operating from an aligned place, then and only then does it make sense for you to look at the operational aspects of this. Because again, everything I just mentioned also has operational aspects to it. The SOPs that go around this, the process for meetings, the recording of all of that you can set up, and that's good and great. But they're all predicated on the proper input from you as the business owner. Okay. If it's of interest for you to dive into more things like this, I actually do an assess 64 stress drivers that are the psychological and emotional drivers behind behaviors like this, like I can't set boundaries, and then the profit and time leaks that they end up creating. If it's of interest for you to explore which of these are driving your profit and time leaks, get in contact with me and we'll go over your Peaceful Profits roadmap, just basically mapping out all of those identity leadership pieces that are creating those profit and time leaks. All right, see you on the next one.